Well, as you've been hearing on the program, in the last 15 minutes or so, we've reported on several cases of abuse targeting women and children. The one story that's dominated headlines this week is the murder of Olorato Mongale, the 30-year-old young woman who was killed in Johannesburg over the weekend after going on a date with a man who's now known only as John, and police say that a manhunt is underway. Gender-based violence has been described as an emergency, a crisis in South Africa, yet women are dying and being raped by their thousands. Let's speak to Mmapaseka Steve Letsike, the Deputy Minister in the Presidency for Youth, Women, as well as people with disabilities. Good to have your time, Deputy Minister. What is your department doing to help fight the scourge of gender-based violence and femicide in this country?
No, thank you so much. Good evening to you and to the listeners of SABC. You would understand that the department has a mandate to coordinate all different departments and stakeholders in responding to gender-based violence. The National Strategic Plan that has been developed works to bring about all different stakeholders to come respond, looking at prevention efforts, looking at response effort, the work that South African Police Service is doing. We're monitoring, we are looking at how those interventions are being responded into, and we raise those fundamental issues with them directly, including the work that is being done by the Department of Justice. And it is why, yes, indeed, you are correct to say that this is a national crisis. It's recognized by government and it affects all sectors, and it's rooted in the socio-economic inequalities.
And do you think that what you are doing, what you've been coordinating then between the multiple levers of government, do you think that's bearing success when almost daily we are seeing reports of young women being murdered, and it appears in some instances that the ways in which they are being killed are becoming more gruesome?
I think one must appreciate the fact that the rootness and the root cause of GBV, it happens at homes, in families, in society. And a lot of time when a government has to come in, it's at response level. And this is why the setting up of 65 Tutuzela Care Center to respond, which are one-stop centers, and looking at how we actually enforce all other departments to do their work in supporting families and society. The work that social workers are doing, led by Department of Social Development and so forth. So I think we must actually not divert from the initial issue, which is exactly where GBV happens. And this is a call that you've seen in terms of awareness that targets men, that targets boys, to check how do we address positive masculinity? How do we change behavior? Because all of that is rooted in terms of what happens in society.
How well has that gone, though? Because the reality feels very different when you look at the conversation among women themselves who've called into radio stations this week, women who've been posting on social media about how they feel utterly helpless. They're being killed in the home, being killed on the street, and it feels like nowhere is safe.
Indeed, I think one of the key things is really about accountability. And you would see that part of the issues and processes we brought forward through legislative measures. But we cannot just say GBV will be protected just legally or by law. Yes, protection is in the law. You want to see accountability. You want to see justice accessed by victims, and also to ensure the stricter accountability for perpetrators. So women indeed are finding themselves in desperate measure. But some of these things are particularly drawn by the economic circumstances, and which we need to end. The research that revealed a lot that financial independency and the agency leave women, a lot of children in this vulnerability. And those are some of the things that leads to abusive elements or intimate partner violence. And in such cases where we find ourselves in crisis.
The point, though, Deputy Minister, is that plans and research are great, and so are the messages of condolence. But until every woman who's affected by the scourge of these crimes feels as though they are safe, or at the very least that there's a system that is responsive in their moment of crisis, it's all just words. It's hollow.
I think one thing that we have to make sure that there must be individuals, people, and this is a whole of society kind of response that everybody must participate in. We need both women and men to be champions of change, because it's also around levels of vulnerability and how do we reduce that. And in this case, we cannot even blame victims, but actually the first point of departure, men must stop to rape, must stop to kill. That's the first point of departure. Second point is whether programs that are being produced, developed, are responding to the needs. The support services that is there, whether it's hotline, whether it's shelters and so forth, we cannot just relegate GBV just to a response that actually find ourselves in a crisis of needing legal service, health service, psychosocial support. The first point of departure is stopping. And it's really about changing masculinity and how it's perceived in terms of discrimination and stigma and violence.
But what does that even mean, right? Changing masculinity. Everyone talks, even during 16 days of activism, about changing toxic masculinity, bringing in boys to teach them how to relate, how to treat women, be it in their families or in intimate relationships, etc. But what exactly does that entail in a meaningful way?
The most important thing, the patriarchy will always want to subject women in a particular form. The way women continue to be objectified, and the way women always have to consider, the economic circumstances, and that all the time we reduce to sexual activities and so forth. When we speak about positive masculinity, is to deal with the mental health, to deal with the gender inequality, but also to deal with the coexistence around educating people of dangers of gender-based violence. Men also are affected by patriarchy. They are affected by the economic circumstances, unemployment, violence. So we need to deal with it. We need to deal with the issue of poverty that everybody is struggling with, mental health, substance use and abuse, but also the power relations that exist in this case.
Again, though, what does that look like in real terms when, again, we've got unemployment that's approaching 33%? That's on the conservative calculation. What does it mean for a young child, a teenager growing up in Alexandra, a young child growing up in a rural part of the Eastern Cape, Limpopo, Bloemfontein? In real terms, what would change look like on the daily is what I find sometimes is missing in the conversation.
The most important thing, and as a lot of us, majority of South African, grew up in poverty, but it should not result into violence. I think the mistake we do is assume that the moment you are hungry or the moment you are unemployed, that must result in abusive or criminal activities. No, we shouldn't. I think where we should be emphasizing access to education and opportunities, we need to enhance the level of active participation, including not being involved in criminal activities. So what it means, people must find opportunities, government must enable that, but also private sector must not relegate and take a back seat. All sectors must play a role, and part of it also includes the issues around dealing with mental health and healing and building a cohesion among society.
Your department in particular, and I appreciate what you outlined earlier in terms of your role as a coordinator in terms of this context this evening. But you do have, don't you, Deputy Minister, a visibility crisis. You've been criticized even before you were Deputy Minister. The criticism of this department has always been that people don't see you, people don't hear you at a community level. We only see the minister, for instance, at the beginning of 16 days of activism, and then after that, you don't appear to be leading any sort of mass movement where even an ordinary South African can have you guys top of mind in terms of seeking help or looking to for guidance in dealing with gender-based violence and femicide. How are you addressing that?
I think one must appreciate the type of department we are. We are not a service department, and we are a department that really focuses on advocacy and accountability. Yes, we would like to be out there doing much more, but some of the things that I want to highlight, as part of government, we have implemented policies like gender equality law that seeks to eliminate gender discrimination in employment, like the public procurement policy that allows women-led, youth-led, persons with disability own businesses to be part. So I think while there's a expected or expectation, but I think we must be understood on the type of department that we are. Secondly, I think the point here is that let's not be selective of what we see and choose to see. I think the department, even in the 7th administration, have actually gone out to actually pull all other departments to play their role, whether it's higher education, whether it's justice, everyone. And this is why you would see that there's a 100-day challenge that we've been supporting, working with civil society, and even the 90-day challenge that is led by both by Minister of Police and Minister as well of Justice. And our own minister is leading the work of our interministerial. So I do think it's quite important to be understood, but also we are there with communities and we collaborate with them.
And I started with an acknowledgement of the role of your department, which you highlighted right at the beginning about you being able to coordinate the work that's been done at the different levels in government and perhaps even the justice system. The point I was making to you, though, in terms of the visibility, pardon me, when I said you're not visible, I know that you can't be on every street, in every house, etc., as government, but I'll give you a basic example. Outside of work and speaking to you on this platform and someone who's on social media, so I'm able to see that. But I've not seen you, for example, in fact, anyone doing any sort of rallying work for the cause in the suburb where I live, in Johannesburg, nor have I seen any concerted community effort in the township where I grew up, in Bloemfontein, where I lived for well over 2 decades. And that is the example that I'm making in terms of visibility, not just by your department, but everyone involved at that level where even if it's not the minister or the deputy minister, there is someone, a group of people, a community organization that we all know we can turn to, outside of communities themselves coming together to form maybe CPFs, etc. Will we ever see that depth of work?
I think one must appreciate government is not only at national level. You have government even at provincial level, at local level. Just yesterday, I was in Mafikeng, in the rural communities there working with young people. I'm definitely sure in your township, even in your suburb, a local government or another department has been there. I don't want us to say that government is not with the people. This government is government of the people.
And I think that
well, you are in the studio, so somewhere, somehow,
Deputy Minister, pardon me, I do exist beyond the studio, though. Like I laid out before, that I do have, I exist in a context beyond this and speak to ordinary people themselves.
But your municipality is there, your government is there. That's why I'm saying that it is unfair to say that. And if you have not, I think let's look at how does the government interact with you, even within community you live with. And I appreciate the point that you are raising in terms of that. But I would look forward to actually you sharing which township. You can send it to me, and then I'll get the information when and how government has participated.
But I started our conversation with the caveat that I appreciate that you can't be on every street in every home, but I was giving you just a practical example that in the context where I exist, there is a lack in that active presence, the work that is supposed to be going on. And that leads me to my next question about whether are we doing enough of it, and how do we get to a point where there is a sense among people, especially the women who are affected, that they are seeing work being done beyond arresting the rapists, the murderers, stopping prevention being better than cure ultimately?
Yeah, and I think, that's an important point. That's why even the multi-sectoral response and collaboration is key. You don't find government working alone, and there's never been promise in terms of government will do this alone. We've called on a whole of society. We do work with civil society. We work with labor, with private sector. And I think the most important thing, the question around are we doing enough? It's not going to be enough as long as we have a lot of violence targeting our children, women, and many of the vulnerable groups for that matter. Secondly, 66 Tutuzela care centers are there. The call center is there that must be utilized. And indeed, we must move beyond arrest. And I'm saying, and I'm calling it very clearly, prevention is the first point of departure. What has happened to Olorato? It's unacceptable in many levels. And the person and the perpetrator, as SABC is doing a manhunt, must be found and be held accountable. And I really do think it's applying to all other cases that we must get. But really, how many should we be responding to as opposed to preventing? One life is more than enough. One rape is more than enough. We must prevent gender-based violence.
Deputy Minister, thank you so much for your time. Deputy Minister Mmapaseka Steve Letsike, the Deputy Minister in the Presidency for Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities.